Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at Morphy's with a German Gewehr 33/40. This is a mountain troops rifle that was produced for just a couple of years early in World War II, and it was manufactured at the Brno factory in Czechoslovakia. Now, Brno was established as a major arms-making factory pretty much immediately upon the establishment of Czechoslovakia as an independent nation in the aftermath of World War I. And it would set up production. Actually, a lot of pretty cool guns came out of Brno. This was where the ZB-26 light machine gun was developed that will become the Bren gun in British service, and that served with a whole bunch of countries during the interwar years, was actually used by the SS during World War II, especially early in World War II. And Brno was also set up with a production line for the Model 98 Mauser, and they produced Mausers both for the Czech military and for export sale, relatively wide export sale. So when Germany annexes Czechoslovakia in the late 1930s, of course they're interested in taking over the Czech arms industry, and there are two main factories that are run by a single company, and this is Zbrojovka Brno. Now they have two factories, like I said. The company's headquartered in Prague, but they have a factory in Brno, and then they also have a factory in Slovakia in a town called Bystrica. When the Germans come in, they take over this company, not through just force, but they actually buy a controlling stake in the corporation, take over its factories, and start to shift their production to fit the German military. Now, in the case of the Bystrica factory, the Czech rifle production line is going to switch over to making German K98Ks. There's an initial production of what's called the Gewehr 24T, which is this guy, which is essentially the Czech VZ24 standard pattern Mauser, just adapted to German use. But that doesn't happen at Brno. Brno is making ZB-26 light machine guns, which will be the subject of a bit of controversy there, and they'd also produced what was designated in Czechoslovakia as the VZ, the Model 33, which is a Mauser carbine, has a 19.3-inch barrel, so it's about 4 inches shorter than a standard Mauser. You can see the difference there. It's not huge, it's a little bit. Standard Mauser has a 600 millimeter barrel. This is 490, 19.3 inches. And for the Czechs, this was used for basically paramilitary police forces. It was used for the gendarmerie, it was used for the finance police, which are basically customs guards, those sorts of guys. Now, the Germans had actually used a very short Mauser carbine like this, but not since before World War I. They used it when they had the old round-nosed 8mm ammunition. When they transitioned to Spitzer ammunition, they discovered that these little tiny short carbines in 7.92 by 57mm modern high-power cartridges are very heavy recoiling and very loud and concussive. And they came to the conclusion that this just wasn't a style of gun that was militarily viable. The trade-off of the blast and the recoil wasn't worth the slight shortening of the gun. And so the Germans would go to carbines that were full K98K length, like this. Sort of what's the international standard in short rifles becomes the German carbine. But they make an exception starting in 1940. They look at this VZ-33 production line and they realize we do have a group of troops that can make better use of a little carbine, for whom this trade-off of blast and recoil for size does make sense. And that's the mountain troops, the Gebirgsjager, or something vaguely sounding like that. And so they decide to adopt the VZ-33 in slightly Germanicized form for the mountain troops. Now it's interesting, while this is going on, there's a lot of work at the Brno factory. There's controversy over what the Germans want Brno to actually be producing. One school of thought says we should shift over their machine gun line to make MG34s, but fresh out of the invasion of Russia, there's some concern, well, I'm sorry, the invasion of Poland, there's some concern about the reliability of the MG34, and there's another school of thought that says we should have them continue producing ZB-26 light machine guns and use those. Some people think we should shift them over to making K98K Mausers. And apparently this was a very argumentative back and forth thing that took a couple of years to fully work out and was responsible for a very inefficient transition to producing German products at Brno. So until 1943 or so, there wasn't a whole lot of production out of Brno, not relative to the size of the factory complex. Eventually, they would produce MG34s and K98Ks, but it took a while. And it's during sort of that transition period when they're trying to figure out what to retool the factory for and actually retool it. Because apparently they started to retool it something like 3 times and then the plan changed and they had to retool it, and this led to not a lot of production. But during that time, they are making VZ33s for German service under the designation Gewehr 33/40. So let's take a closer look at what exactly that was. All right, once again, it's Mauser. So we are going straight to the top of the receiver markings to start with. This is a late production example of the 3340. It's 1942. This was the last year of production. You'll find them 40, 41, and 42. Is marked with a 3-letter German ordnance code of a DOT. That was the code in 1942 for the Brno factory. It started out in 1940 with the code being 945. They made 945 rifles in 1940, and then in 1941 they switched to DOT. One interesting side note on the 3340s is Brno did make a batch of receivers that were 1941 dated, 945 coded. Those were never actually assembled into complete rifles. They were set aside as essentially armor spare parts. And the speculation is that someone messed up and they didn't realize until it was too late that they were supposed to have changed the factory code. So rather than scrap those or remark them, they just set them aside as spare parts. At any rate, DOT is the 41 and 42 code for rifles. We also have the exact bore diameter stamped right here on top of the receiver. In this case, it's 7.88. Early in 1942, so not long after this rifle was made, that marking would be moved up onto the barrel shank under the handguard, and it would be replaced by a Waffenamp there. The side rail is marked with the German designation of G Gewehr 33/40. That indicates the Czech Model 33 rifle with the German pattern of 1940 modifications. Serial number is here on the left side of the receiver, along with a German proof mark. The serializing on the 3340s followed exactly the same pattern as on the Czech VZ33s. So the style, the font, and the location of the serial numbers will match the earlier Czech guns. So this doesn't quite look like a K98K style of serial number, and that's because they were following the Czech patterns. Once they got to 9999, they did then go to letter prefixes or letter suffixes. So you'll get A, B, C, etc. With those letters resetting each year. So this is a pretty early 1940 gun. In 1940, they would get up halfway through the D block. And we have a couple more German proofs here on the right side of the receiver. These are a little bit hard to see under a refinishing. Originally, you would have had a serial number and some proofs in the stock. You can just barely see the remnants of the serial number there. Laminated stocks on Mausers in general just didn't take stampings nearly as well as the solid wood stocks. The most distinctive feature of the 3340 is, of course, its shortened barrel, so a little over 4 inches less than the regular K98K. But other than that, the hardware out here is pretty much the same. Cleaning rod, standard German pattern bayonet lug. We have a front sight hood that is a little bit distinctive for the 3340. And frankly, it looks kind of odd with this big long sight hood set on a short little sight there, but that's how they did it. In light of the shorter barrel, the rear sight is shortened compared to a regular K98K. It only goes out to 1,000 meters, which is still probably a solid 750 meters more than you could practically use this at. And then the other really distinctive element on the 3340 is this metal plate that has been added to the side of the buttstock. And that is there specifically because these are being used by mountain troops. You see a few conflicting stories on exactly what the purpose of this plate is. It's of course there to protect the stock. Some of the original documentation talks about it protecting from the cleats of mountain trooper boots. One presumes that the other discussion I've seen is that rifles are going to be used as climbing aids to some extent. So you have a metal butt plate there, and then this would be on the inside edge against, leaning up against the trooper when it's being used as a walking stick or climbing stick, and this is prone to being accidentally kicked, and so this plate is there to protect the stock. Anyway, very distinctive element and something that is unique to mountain trooper rifles. Now the original Czech carbines had bottom-mounted sling swivels. The Germans for the 3340 changed that around to have the standard German slot through the stock. They added the bolt disassembly disc, something that wasn't on the original Czech pattern. Other than that, it's pretty much standard like the VZ33. This being a carbine, the Czechs wanted to reduce its weight as much as possible, and so on their VZ33, and this carried over to the German 3340, they actually hollowed out the bolt handle knob there. So that's the easy way to tell the correct bolt from a 3340. And then the serial number for the bolt will be on the back of the bolt handle here. Again, this is a numbering convention taken over from the Czech rifle, and that's why it doesn't match the K98K. There should be a German firing proof mark here on the root of the bolt handle. I don't know why it's not there on this particular one. The magazine is exactly the same as a standard K98K, 5 rounds, double stack in this flush-fitting internal magazine. One last thing we'll do here is pop off the handguard to show you the top of the barrel. So I removed the nose cap and the barrel band. This is held in place by a spring latch. A little bit clunky to get this off. So you have a round spring clip here on the back. That's what actually holds the handguard in place. And underneath that we have the serial number and another firing proof. Again, shortly after this production in 42, this barrel bore diameter would move up to this position right here. And then we also have the barrel batch code, manufacturer and batch code right there. These are light, handy carbines. That barrel is short and it's relatively small in diameter down in there too. Kind of cool, until you have to shoot it without ear protection. The G3340 is in production from 1940 until 1942. 1943 they start production of K98Ks, standard pattern rifles, and that's when these production ends. Grand total of about 130,000 of these are manufactured. 1940 they make about 50,000 of them. 41 they make about 35,000. 42 bumps up a little bit to about 45,000. They're used for the mountain troops. They're cool collectible guns today because they are a little bit different. They're more distinguishable and more different from some of the other German, like foreign substitute rifles that were put into service. And there's like half a dozen different rifle patterns that the Germans will take from other countries, slightly tweak and adopt into service before they have those other countries generally start producing K98Ks. This is the most distinctive of them because that barrel is different, because it's got that metal plate on the buttstock. Those sorts of things. So very cool guns to have a chance to take a look at. Big thanks to Morphy's for giving me access to this one to show to you. If you're curious, I did in fact do a video on the 3340 like 8 years ago now, and went back and looked at it and realized it definitely needed updating. There was a lot more information that I ought to put in it. So hence we have this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.